Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. The recent visit of Israel's president to India comes after the visit of the Indian president to Israel and could set the stage for a visit by India's Prime Minister to Israel over the next several months, because relations between the two countries, particularly in defense and strategic issues, are at an unprecedented high.
The visit by Israel's President Reuven Rivlin to mark 25 years of diplomatic relations between the two countries came after a gap of 23 years, following the visit to India by Israel's Ariel Sharon in 2003. However, this hasn't stopped the two countries from strengthening ties with each other on a range of issues, despite India's deep engagement also with the Gulf countries. India has become one of Israel's largest trading partners, with many of the world's leading high-tech companies in Israel and India forging joint ventures in areas of agriculture and water management. But it is the common fight against the threat of Islamic extremists that is at the heart of India's relations with Israel. And that gathered considerable momentum after the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai, where a number of Jews, like those in Chabad House, were specifically targeted by the Pakistani attackers. This not only led to a number of bilateral visits for talks and training to fight terrorism, but also to Indian military purchases in 2011 worth $1 billion of Israeli anti-tank missiles, simulators and peripheral equipment. And then in 2015-16, Indian government's approval to purchase 10 drones and 2 AWACS planes. Following up on an earlier deal of 2007, when India had purchased 50 drones and had also inked a $2.5 billion deal to develop an anti-aircraft system and missiles for the country, that was then the biggest defense contract in history of Israel. Today, India is the biggest market for Israeli military equipment. Military ties between the two countries can be traced back to India's war with China in 1962. But it was during the Kargil conflict in 1999, when India faced a dire shortage of ammunition, that Israel came to India's rescue. This led to India's president saying recently that Israel has crucially come through for India at times when India needed them the most. India's largely pro-Arab stance has not adequately been reciprocated or rewarded by the Arab world. They have refused to put pressure on Pakistan to rein in its terror groups that inflame the cross-border insurgency in Kashmir. On the contrary, Arab nations have firmly stood by Pakistan, that has used the OIC to build support for Islamabad and jihadi groups in Kashmir.
We have with us two very experienced observers and people who have interacted extensively with the Israelis from the Indian side. We have Mr. Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, has served as an Indian diplomat in Israel and in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, so quite clearly understands both the Arab-Israeli dimension and how India looks at Israel and that part of the world. And we have once again with us the distinguished Professor Bharat Karnad, eminent commentator on national security issues and matters military, and one who has engaged, as I'm told, extensively with the Israeli defense and strategic affairs community and the industry from time to time. Professor Karnad, sir, my first question goes to you, obviously, because the big area of Indo-Israel cooperation is defense. We are, I'm told now, the biggest market for Israel's defense industry. Bilateral trade is in excess of $5 billion a year, which is a large amount for a country the size of Israel. And there has been times when Israel has outpaced or outbid American companies to provide us the technology that we want, considering that the US is now our biggest defense supplier. So A, how do you see Israel-US relationship going when competing for the Indian market? And how do you see India just straight away engaging with Israel and the transfer of technology so essential for the Indian market?
Well, look, I think the United States has been a bit of a, shall we say, retardant. It has tried to stop the flow of extremely advanced technology to India that Israel was willing to transferred to us. For instance, the indigenous ESA radar, active electronically phased radar that you have for fighter combat aircraft. The original idea was to fit in the ELTA 2052 computer, but the Americans didn't allow it because it had IPR with some American company. They allowed only a substandard 2032, not substandard, a slightly derated version of the computer, the 2032. That's the kind of game that's been going on. Now the United States, after the indigenous project has really advanced a bit, they have now permitted Israel to come in with the 2052. You know, they play these games to keep India, I think, as I see it, from Washington's point of view, slightly a kilter, you know, off balance, while the Israelis are more forthcoming. If the Americans were to remove their you know, objections, which they occasionally, now and then, impose on the transfer of this or that technology, for whatever reasons of their own, and also because, as you say, there is competition. Right. They'd rather have the American company sell it rather than an Israeli company.
Yeah,
so that's
the
always
list of equipment that the Israelis have still managed to supply us is quite extensive, and you know it, and for the benefit of our viewers, I'll rattle that out a bit later. But Mr. Pinaka Chakravarti, sir, as I understand, and I think this is the first time we're making it public, that you were one of the key people in formulating the kind of policy shift that eventually led to the formalization of diplomatic ties with Israel. 91, 92, I think the paper you wrote was about 1990. So the thing is that how was it perceived at that point of time in South Bloc, considering the fact that India has traditionally lent so heavily on the Arab world, and there is that huge baggage that we have in our mind that we must vote with the Arabs, we must show sympathy to the Palestinian cause because the Arab countries are so key to our energy security, and the traditional Nehruvian line that, you know, those were friends of ours that we couldn't upset. So has it really upset our relationship with the Arab world, or just like the Arabs deal with the US, they have begun to deal with India despite India's links with Israel?
I would say we have navigated this, relationship between the Arabs or the Arab countries and Israel fairly successfully. Because by now we have good relations with almost all countries, including Iran, which is still so hostile to Israel. But as you know, currently Saudi Arabia and others are themselves talking to Israel. Egypt and Jordan, after the Madrid peace process, actually opened diplomatic relations with Israel. I think that was the impetus for us also to rethink our policy, that if those who had fought wars with Israel could now have diplomatic relations with Israel, in fact that was the crux of the argument, then why not India? After all, India had recognized Israel in 1950. And there's a very interesting story of how Einstein intervened with Pandit Nehru to help him make that decision to recognize Israel.
Really?
Yes, it's a very interesting story. It's been written about. It's in the public domain now, those letters. And although Einstein himself was a reluctant Zionist, in fact, Einstein was offered the first presidentship of Israel, and as one of the most famous among the Jewish people that we can ever think of. And but he refused because he didn't want to join politics. And so those are some of the interesting stories, at least that's history today. But I think we were slowly moving away from the old set policy because the world was changing, the peace process had begun, etc. I think that was the main impetus, though I dare say there was quite a lot of resistance within the governmental system as well as to what the Arabs will do or how will be. After all, we had intense relationship with the Arabs, which we continue to this day. But as you can see, we have managed to maintain a certain degree of balance between and juggling these two relationships. Today it would be far easier for any government to juggle this relationship than, say, 2 decades ago.
Right. In fact, I've myself been asked this question, the odd lecture I've given in the Arab world, to say that, how can you say you're close to the Arab world if you're building ties with Israel? And I told many Arab diplomats that why don't you ask this question to United States, who's your patron as much as the patron of the Israelis. But Professor Karnad, sir, once again, the problem of India-Israel defense trade is, one is, of course, you brought out in terms of some obstacles that are placed by the US. The other issue that comes to my mind is because if I see this long list by which Israel has been providing us technology, and I think the figure is close to $15 billion over the years, which is a very large amount, and I believe many more deals are in the pipeline to fructify entirely. Do we have the capacity in India to finally do the TOT, transfer of technology, absorb it, and actually get to the Make in India stage, which is really the dream project of the Prime Minister?
The kind of, the cooperation and collaboration we are seeking and we are establishing with Israel, there are some problems. I'll refer to them in a very telegraphic way by saying the Israelis are trying to get the best deals they can for themselves. So what that ends up happening, doing for the Indian end of collaboration is we get the low end of technology work. For instance, on the long-range surface-to-air missiles, LRSAMs, and long-range SAMs. So what happens is we are developing the canisters and so on and so forth, while they are doing the motors, the rocket motors. Now, this is where I find there's a bit of, shall we say, dissatisfaction at the Indian end, discontent at the DRDO Indian end, because they find themselves doing very elementary basic work, while the more difficult, more advanced work is farmed out by the Israelis to themselves in Israel. So they do the high-value work while we do the low-end work, which I think is not sustainable over time. And given the fact that we have software advantages that even Israel would not be able to match if properly used, if our resources are properly used, and we're doing that in BrahMos, for instance, we have written the software. So it's hardly difficult for us to write software and do the kind of algorithms and so on and so forth for missile systems that we could share with Israel.
Very, very interesting point you brought out, and we'll deliberate a bit about it after the break, when we will also look at the history of Indo-Israel ties and where the two countries can actually move together, considering both have strengths of their own. But that after the break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two distinguished guests with us, and Ambassador Chakrabarti, sir, I want you to throw a bit more light on this diplomatic relationship with Israel, particularly considering the fact that historical records show that Israel, despite not having formal diplomatic ties with India until 91-92, but was engaging with India in the post-62 war, and at that time they provided us weapon systems, 65 and 71 war, weapon systems and certain amount of expertise. I believe Prime Minister Golda Meir went out of her way, despite various other Western countries wanting to block supplies to India. So there was always a certain chemistry and a synergy between India and Israel, a huge country and a small country, but in a way quite similar, the way we are and the way we operate. Is this something that Mr. Modi decided to build up on, or it was anyway in the offing?
Let me begin by saying that right in the very beginning, I mentioned Einstein's trying to persuade then Ben-Gurion and Pandit Nehru had extensive correspondence, and they came from that similar kind of background, socialist and all that. I think it was Ben-Gurion who perhaps laid down Israeli policy towards India, basically simply to say that don't worry, in the long run, India is going to be your friend. I think that was the basic thing. And if you look at Israel's behavior and engagement with India, Israel has actually stuck to that line. Despite India saying all kinds of anti-Israeli things and pro-Palestinian things, Israel has never said any anti-Indian thing ever. And that, I think, was a gift of Ben-Gurion. And they stuck to it, and I think they are reaping the dividends now. The other point I wish to make is that, yes, there has been a history, Israel has stepped in. I think Pandit Nehru himself reached out to Ben-Gurion in 1962 during the Chinese war. And I can tell you that the Israelis went out of their way, even at that time when they were not as, stable or didn't have the kind of sophisticated technologies that they have today. And they did help out. And that happened repeatedly throughout the wars that India has fought, including up to Kargil. In terms of supply of certain equipment, supply of ammunition, most of that was, limited to those aspects. But then we have gone far beyond supply of ammunition, and we've gone into niche technologies, etc. Now, Israel has developed over the years. Israel is a high-tech society. There's no doubt about it. And Israel has developed technologies that were denied to us by other countries, particularly the United States, because of its export control regulations, because of the Wassenaar arrangement, because of our nuclear program, and all these things. So we were actually at the receiving end of a technology denial regime that advanced countries had put together. Israel was the only exception.
Right. In fact, there is a notable change on India's stance vis-a-vis Israel. I think of late we've not really been pushing anti-Israel resolutions at the UN, and also the fact that India has been a bit disappointed with the Arab world continuing to go along with Pakistan's line, particularly at the OIC and other places which are very stridently anti-Indian. But Professor Karnad, sir, the number of deals that we have done with Israel, what really strikes out to me is another area other than defense technology transfer is homeland security. Particularly in the aftermath of the Mumbai attacks on 26/11, there has been a lot of training, a lot of movement, quietly, a lot of it in an understated way. But I think we stand to gain from Israel, both in terms of technology to deal with terrorism and expertise, as well as in areas of cyber security where we stand vulnerable. Any thoughts?
Yeah, what is not generally acknowledged is the extent of intel, that's intelligence sharing, in the sense of the processes of, how do you process information that relates to terrorist organizations and so on and so forth, the use of filters in the systems to take out extraneous material, etc. That's the kind of stuff that Israel has helped us with, as also with the kind of Arab funds coming in. And this is through Saudi Arabia and the so-called charitable funds that come in from Qatar and the Gulf countries. Israel has been very, very helpful because they know that area very well. And so we have got a lot of, I think, very notable and actionable intelligence. That said, I think the fact also is that in anti-terrorist, counterinsurgency, those kinds of operations, the Israelis, the defense forces have particular expertise, as that's, they have been fighting a war of survival since the inception, as it were. And they are the leading nation state with that expertise. And they've shared it with us. Of course, the conditions are not exactly analogous, but there are similarities in the kind of threats we face in this, and the threats that the Israeli state faces. So the internal threat, for instance, of Arabs within Israel. More and more, the Israeli state is very worried. And they are learning from us as to how to keep the minority community pacified. And maybe our record is, whatever it is, the fact is that we have had the minority community with us, which are part of the woof and weave of Indian society.
Right. Right. Well, that's a very good point, and I think that's where I earlier referred to the similarity in the way both nations are faced. There is an issue that very rarely comes up for discussion, is about Israel's strong business and defense ties with China. China remains Israel's huge investor, Annual trade volume of China with Israel is twice that of India, in excess of $10 billion. It is Israel's largest trading partner in Asia. But interestingly, Israel doesn't look at Beijing as a strategic partner the way it looks at India. Why?
You see, one reason is that American legislation on technology prevents Israel from providing a level of technology the Chinese would be interested in. Now, the Chinese have themselves gone much ahead in terms of technology procurement and technology assimilation. So I think that aspect, plus I think Israel usually has to keep in mind what the U.S. Advises it, because they are, as you know, one of the closest alliance partners. And plus they are also worried as to what India will think. Because after all, don't forget, as you yourself mentioned, Israel is today the third largest defense partner in terms of defense supplies. So I don't think they want to jeopardize that relationship for a relationship with China, particularly in the defense sector. I'm not talking about the commercial and other issues, where of course China, I mean, even India is a major trading partner of China for that matter. So I think Israel is careful about maintaining its defense and technological ties. And software, etc., we have had, Israeli companies and Indian companies collaborating for a very long time. And the other aspect for historical reasons, as far back as 1948, Gujarati families settled in Israel, in Tel Aviv, to start the diamond trading business, which is one of the largest items on our trading list. And because Israel, there is a diamond bourse in Israel where raw diamonds are sold. And these are bought, and as you know, India is one of the largest processors of raw diamonds. And that's how they come to India. And these Gujarati families are very interesting. They are now there for several generations, and they form quite a close bond with India.
Right. Professor Karnad, last quick question, short answer. India and Israel are working towards this missile shield called the Dome. And it's said to have pretty high level of accuracy, and it's something that would obviously provide a great degree of comfort to people in the capital, in Delhi, in the event of tensions up with Pakistan. Do you look at it optimistically?
No, look, you're talking about the Iron Dome. Yeah. That's supposed to be, laid over Israel. That's a very different situation, because the threat from Arab, especially Hezbollah, and these are the kinds of threats, they do not have the kind of material wherewithal that our adversaries do. So the Iron Dome, like the Katyusha rockets and all, is what the Iron Dome can handle. We are talking about ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, a very different kettle of fish. There is no air defense system anywhere in the world or air defense technology that is viable, that can viably intercept, interdict incoming missiles, including our own Prithvi system or the Arrow 2 that the Israelis have as part of the so-called Iron Dome, or even the Patriot 3, which is supposed to be advanced. None of these things can handle salvos of incoming missiles. Let's be very clear. There is no defense against ballistic missiles when they come in mass, fired in mass. Just one little thing on the terrorism front. They are the ones that are, Israelis are the ones who are helping us with laser walls that you, Parika and others have mentioned, on the border. They are very intimately involved in experimenting and trying to set up. It's a very difficult terrain to set up even these very high technology screens to detect intrusion, etc. So these are the areas where you can expect much more collaboration, and fruitful one at that.
Well, we're completely out of time, but quite clearly there are lots of areas of cooperation, and there is a lot more that India and Israel can achieve. I think we are still waiting for things to go to a dramatic new level, but till that happens, thank you very much, sir, for being with us on this show. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye and thank you.